What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Roots. I'm going to review the third album by No Doubt. Basically, this came out in the fall of 1995 and it's called Tragic Kingdom. Now, this is a particularly hugely successful album. It went diamond. You know, albums used to do that back in the 90s, 80s, that type of stuff, and early 2000s and such. But this is one that, yeah, it sold over 10 million copies. Definitely seen as one of the better selling albums of all time. Got to the seventh single and just definitely overall lasted for a while. I mean, the promotion for this lasted between mid-late 1995 all the way to about early 1998. So they promoted this for quite some time, and they really didn't even have to put out another album until 5 years later. The cycle for this project was so large that the Return to Saturn album didn't come out until the year 2000. Now, this is definitely a successful album. I've only listened to like a couple of albums by No Doubt. I've checked out a little bit of their 2012 album, little bit. I know their Rocksteady album from 2000 pretty well, and I know this album, but I need to check out some more of them. But they were around since like grunge was around back in the early 90s and that type of stuff, and they were kind of seen as like an alternative to like alternative music, which was kind of strange just because grunge was kind of alternative, but they were an alternative to like alternative. So this is kind of the concept, but this was definitely a widespread album. This is one that charted extremely well. The problem with this album though is just the fact that it kind of got damned so many times, just because even their biggest song on this album, which was Don't Speak, did not necessarily hit #1 on the Billboard 100. I mean, nowadays it most assuredly probably would have, but because it was not released as a commercial single, it never hit #1 on the billboards. As this kind of thing. It's a song that you hear all the time, but there just were certain songs, like there was another one, I think Will Smith had a song like that or something like that, that basically sometimes in the 90s there would be songs that would hit #1 just in pseudo like aspects because they wouldn't be released as a single, but they would have so much airplay that they damn near did hit #1. So this was kind of the thing. It was too bad about that. Really, the only true single that charted on this project was Just a Girl, which is quite an excellent song. I feel like those two are like the good burst of this project. So in assuming that this album is a one-hit wonder, it really isn't. It's very off-key and off-kilter in some ways. I would have to say it's not a bad project, and it is going to get a pretty high score. But it's just kind of the fact that this is kind of abstract, where it has an amalgamation of styles like ska punk, pop rock, new wave, that type stuff. Just a bunch of different orientations, a little bit of reggae in there also, just some pop punk, and just a whole bunch of different type sounds that, while it wasn't something, I mean, it went diamond, so that definitely says something, but it's just the fact that the Billboard did not really like taste and swallow this album quite as well as it probably would have seen for an album that sold as much as it did. It did get to the seventh single, but more than likely in terms of radio airplay, most people only probably heard Just a Girl and Don't Speak, which is kind of, this was a mismatch. This album just got really botched, and I think it probably could have been a lot larger had the songs actually connected and charted. I don't know why Gwen Stefani and her band did not drop these singles commercially, because I just would have wondered how some of them would have charted. Now, I can at least admit that, like, I definitely think the most hooky songs were Just a Girl and Don't Speak, but it's just kind of interesting that these songs just did not really attract more attention. I mean, it got enough attention to go diamond, but it just didn't attract the attention to have, like, them just have, like, a true multifaceted reign. Regardless of that, this album's still going to get a pretty decently high score. Let's talk about the singles. There were 7 of them. So the first single is Just a Girl, and this is like an immediate highlight. This is just really hooky. This really feels like a song that pretty much got pretty close to #1. Hit like the top 20 of the Billboard, but this is one of the songs that got Gwen Stefani completely in the spotlight and really got her voice as like a ubiquitous kind of sound that was just a product of the 90s and stuff. Just a really good kind of hooky highlight. This one is like a pop rock gem, just a real hooky kind of summer smash with some stepping out kind of fun. Just really has that breezy kind of May, June, July kind of energy towards it. Just an easy kind of summer highlight. It's an overall good hook overall. This really nice song to kind of get started with, No Doubt, and was one of the easy kind of hits of the album. This is one that's not just one that you have to learn and research about, but one you've probably heard a few times on the radio, since this is a pretty old project now. But just to kind of say, Spiderwebs was the second single, and this is one that could have charted. This is one that hit number 18 on the Spiderwebs is a song that hit 18 on the airplay chart, which on that same chart, Don't Speak hit #1 and stayed there for 16 weeks. So I don't know if Spiderwebs would have hit number 18 on the Billboard 100 had it charted in the regular charts, but it was a song that charted decently well. This is a real good day commute, kind of restaurant kind of music type feel. I feel like Spiderwebs, this is kind of like, I mean, kind of the stuff that Smash Mouth kind of does, and a little bit of Sugar Ray, where they kind of make restaurant music and just kind of going about city traverse, just kind of in the daytime, just kind of hop and bop kind of feels towards it. It just has some nice pep, but it's just kind of flittery. There's a lot of songs on here where Gwen Stefani is really kind of flittery and kind of like here and there and just kind of wishy-washy a lot of the times, and it's kind of the concept. I mean, if you're paying attention more to the lyrics, that's kind of the concept. There's just a lot of bickering type songs, but I do like Spiderwebs, just a nice day commute and kind of restaurant type music. It's too bad that this song didn't chart heavier, because it is a pretty decent one. I mean, the hook is not as good as Don't Speak and Just a Girl, but it is pretty good. The largest song on this album was Don't Speak, and this was the third single. Basically, it was one of the largest songs in 1996. It was just a huge, humongous kind of song that was just all over the place. It was constantly played, just had constant airplay, and it was just a product. Basically, when you think of like the late 90s, after like Nirvana and Kurt Cobain and Alice in Chains and the grunge type stuff, and more where the era where Foo Fighters was starting to kick in and some of that type stuff, and Sugar Ray and like Smash Mouth and some of those type folks. This is kind of a song that's just ubiquitous with the late 90s. This is really a large song, pretty much one of the central kind of songs of the 90s. And it's basically like, I really like this song. I mean, even today, it just continues to be a highlight. It's just a dark, swirling kind of malaise type tune. It just has a sprawling hook, just has some great summer heat. Despite the fact that it's kind of a darker song, it just really feels like one of those songs that just is kind of like a dark mistress in that kind of format, just like Hell Hath a Woman Be Scorned or something like that. This kind of feels like that concept of some of that. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned is kind of in that context. It's kind of like a real scorn kind of song, but just kind of in the instance of it, that it just is a continued highlight, and just really has that kind of sprawling kind of energy just overall that just stretches pretty much throughout the summer. I mean, this is a song that you can play starting in like late April, early May, and it continues to have energy until like September, October. It's just one that I really like, the kind of dark and kind of malaise feeling towards it, but it does kind of have some somewhat pep in terms of that. It's just, Gwen Stefani really tore this song apart. Excuse Me, Mister is the fourth single. Now, this is one that didn't necessarily chart. The rest of the singles on this album, apart from Don't Speak and Just a Girl, really didn't chart that well. They might have charted on the rock charts, but I'd have to look to each individual page to see that. So I'm just going to kind of just assume that they just were not like mammoth kind of hits, but they were hit enough to make this album go diamond. So Excuse Me, Mister is like an up-tempo kind of song. This has some real kind of furious energy. It's a lot more peppy. Like if Just a Girl was like that pop rock kind of gem that's just kind of bubbly and bouncy, I feel like Excuse Me, Mister is kind of more of like a kind of pub like, almost kind of evening kind of bar type tune that's just very up tempo, and it's kind of a bickerish song. It's a good evening venue kind of fanfare. It just kind of has that pep towards it. Gwen Stefani really kind of sounds riveting in the song, and she just sounds kind of like abrupt and that type of stuff. So it's just an interesting one to kind of get. It's just a good one for that sort of thing. Pretty much one of the better songs to kind of step out to and kind of have in like that sense. I mean, this album is very much like Day Commute, but it just kind of has like a lot of different amalgamations of pep, where it just, there's some stuff that's kind of like the restaurant kind of day commute type stuff and shopping mall and strip mall type stuff like Smash Mouth and Sugar Ray, but there's also some stuff on here that is kind of evening based and just kind of has some of that. Like, I feel like Don't Speak is a song you could play at an evening venue, and I feel like Excuse Me, Mister is a good one for that. Yeah, so there's just some good ones in that sort of sense, but Excuse Me, Mister is just a real good kind of lightly stepping out kind of tune. Sunday Morning kind of showcases Gwen Stefani and no doubt the band's kind of taste for reggaeton type music and kind of the fusion. They definitely did that with songs like uh, Underneath It All off of Rocksteady and some of those type ones. Definitely a good one. This is an early evaluation of that. Sunday Morning just has a real nice wake and bake kind of feel towards it. And by wake and bake, I mean smoking in the morning. This would have to say it's a real nice song for that. Just really has some good kind of energy on there. Just really kind of reggaeton. Feels like feels like Gwen Stefani on like some Bob Marley type shit, just in that sort of context. It's interesting enough to kind of get it. It's just a lazy morning kind of gem, but it just has some spark on there, so I definitely appreciated that one. It's kind of original. I like when No Doubt kind of does some of these reggae type tunes. This really has some good pep. It's interesting enough. Happy Now is kind of another song that's similar. Happy Now is the sixth single. This is one that's kind of similar to like Excuse Me Mister. It just has some real good getting ready to go out kind of feel towards it. It's an evening gem, and it kind of has some exciting jive towards it. Or I feel like Happy Now is probably like a shade or two lighter in terms of energy to Excuse Me Mister, but it still kind of has that evening pep towards it. It's definitely an evening gem, and it has some jive towards it. It's just an overall good kind of cagey kind of riff on there. The thing about No Doubt is they don't get like the sheer kind of like they don't get like the sheer mosh pit and kind of riff heavy craziness, but they do have some ones that are kind of in between where it's like, hey, this is not just all summery kind of bubbly bubblegum pop type stuff, but there is like some stuff on here that has like some decently edgy evening kind of riffs, and Happy Now is kind of one of those, along with Excuse Me Mister and a little bit of Don't Speak. And then Hey You is basically, this is kind of like an in-between one. This is kind of like more evening-based, late day kind of energy, kind of similar to Don't Speak, but just a little bit earlier in the day. It's real, Hey You is kind of more 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock p.m. hangout type music. This where you're kind of hanging out just at the house before you get ready to step out. It's kind of in that same kind of jive where it's just kind of the initial kind of dap getting and just like acquaintancing and that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes, just the meetup and those sorts of things as far as getting ready to step out and things getting ready to happen. It's not quite the sheer craziness. It's not quite the sheer craziness of the night, but it is a song that kind of gave me butterflies, just in the sense where you know that you're getting ready to have some good times, and just kind of that sort of edge towards that. I like those kind of songs that are just, I mean, Happy Now kind of did that too, but that one's pretty much closer to getting towards the jive and that type stuff. But Hey You's kind of one that's just kind of in the process of getting ready to go out and stuff. That's the 7 singles. Yeah, there's definitely a lot to talk about on here. There's 14 songs. I mean, if this had been a 12-song album, I definitely would have said it pretty much would have damn near been a classic. But I just look after it to talk about the 9.5 songs I recommend on here out of, or 10, yeah, 9.5 songs I recommend out of 14. That's pretty good, just to be able to say that there's really only like 3.5 songs I didn't, or 4.5 songs I didn't. So those 9.5 songs would be, I'll go ahead and recommend them. Those 9.5 songs would be Excuse Me Mister, Spiderweb, Sunday Morning, Happy Now, Hey You, Just a Girl, Don't Speak, Different People, and 16. And the song I'm on the fence about is You Can Do It. So apart from the whopping 7 singles, there's 2 other songs on this album that I wholesomely recommend, and one of which is 16, which is a pretty nice bop on here. This is just a good shopping day kind of commute song, and just strip mall and shopping mall music. Has some nice pep, and it's just an overall nice gem. This one just talks about being 16 and that type of stuff. Just really great kind of strip mall, shopping mall kind of music for just stepping out in kind of a more peppy sense. And then I also feel like Different People is a nice one. This is another kind of evening venue. Different People is kind of evening venue kind of music, and it's also evening restaurant kind of music where you don't have to just go to a restaurant at noon or 1 o'clock. If you're going to a restaurant at like 5:30, 6:30, 7 o'clock p.m., something like that. It's just kind of music for that sort of sense. I like kind of getting some evening restaurant music. Doesn't necessarily have to be date night, but it can just kind of be just going to a restaurant 7 p.m., something like that. Just kind of looking after. It's just like restaurant wheeze and evening venue wheeze and that type of stuff. Just a nice mid bop. It doesn't quite have the sheer energy. It's not quite as like butterfly inducing as like it's not quite as butterfly inducing as Hey You and Happy Now and Excuse Me Mister and some of those type ones, but it does have a decent feel of just like, hey, you know, I'm kind of having some decent fun and this is going to be some good times, that sort of sense. So it just kind of has that light kind of licks of that. It's just a nice one, but definitely like the Different People is like a lighter version of the songs like Hey You and Happy Now and Excuse Me Mister, where it's definitely kind of evening venue, evening restaurant type feel, but it's just kind of in a lighter sense. And just kind of more in that sort of sense as far as getting ready to have some good times, and just that, you know, decent sized spark of just having some riveting times in that sort of sense. So I definitely like that one. But the reason why You Can Do It is kind of an almost song is this one kind of sounds, You Can Do It has a very covert sounding kind of feel towards it. It sounds like something out of a James Bond movie or some sort of espionage type trip. It's just very kind of spy-like and that sort of stuff, espionage kind of sounding. It's just a bickering song with some decent plushness towards it. Do kind of like the feel of it. It's a little bit smooth, but I just didn't like the message of the song. That was what kind of held me back. Is just the concept of just trying to be like a motivational kind of pep, like you can get it taken care of. I mean, I somewhat like the feel of the song and the production of the song, but I feel like maybe the message was more optimistic in the context of how I would have liked to have dealt with it. But that's about the only thing. That's the only real song that I didn't really wholesome and like some degree of the lyrics in there. But I would have to say the other songs I didn't enjoy, which would just be like the last 3 songs on the album. The last 3 songs just kind of have like more kind of peppy, optimistic restaurant type music. That's definitely the feel of World Go Round and Ended on this. Those are just kind of a lot more bubbly and just more optimistic, kind of like a just more kind of fluffy version of Just a Girl and some of that. They're just really kind of a little bit more optimistic than I would have wanted. And I just didn't like the beat riff on Tragic Kingdom. That one was kind of an odd one. Just didn't quite pick up on the energy of that. That was kind of a different and awkward one to kind of have as far as that context went. And then like The Climb was just kind of a lengthier song. I just didn't like the arrangements of how that one kind of went. I just wasn't matching up with how that went. I don't know why that was such a lengthier song and such, but that's really only about 4 songs out of 14. So for the most part, me liking 9.5 songs out of 14. I'm gonna go ahead and give this album 9.5 out of 14. That's almost 10. I'm gonna go ahead and give this album like a I'm gonna give this album like an 8.75 out of 10. I feel like 9.5 out of 14. I would have, if I would have liked 10 out of 14, I probably would have given it a 9 out of 10. But I feel like I raised this score pretty high just because I liked all 7 of the singles. This album did go diamond. It's one of the highest selling albums of all time, and definitely a central album of the 90s. Made Gwen Stefani like a household name, and the No Doubt band for the most part a household name. Just really had some charting hits. I mean, I can't say it's a wholesome victory just because although it did go diamond and have 7 singles, really not all 7 of the singles got consistent airplay. Really the only songs I truly hear anymore are Just a Girl and Don't Speak, and really those are the only songs that charted in America. It's not to say I'm slashing the score because of that, but it's just not. It's kind of like a, a diamond selling album with an asterisk just because it's kind of like technical. That just kind of happens to be a thing, but I give it an 8.75. Definitely a pretty good and solid sounding highlight. Definitely almost essential, and I mean it's definitely a victory, but it's just pretty close to being like a complete contagious kind of one as far as that kind of goes. I just would have to say. So the social score though, I will give like the social score, I'll give a 9.5 out of 10 because it did have 7.5 singles, which is pretty excellent. Just a lot of these were pretty central, and they did have various airplay in different regions and that type of stuff. It's just the fact that they only had like 2 central cuts that were just nationwide and just complete, like ubiquitous everywhere. But I kind of look after, there's a lot of good moments. There are some stepping out kind of tunes that have some good energy for like good lifestyles and just a good pitch. It doesn't quite have the sheer party craziness, but then 90s albums didn't always have that. It was just kind of more implied in that sort of sense. But there is some great energy. Don't Speak is a real classic highlight. Just a Girl is an overlooked kind of highlight. And there are some hits on here like Excuse Me Mr. Spiderwebs, Sunday Morning's a nice one. Just all of the singles. So it's just really good. Pretty much as close as to 10 as it would get as far as that's kind of concerned. It's just that excellent in terms of the vibes it gave. So the only reason why I don't give it a 10 is just because they just didn't have the chart appeal. So that's pretty much the thing. In terms of the future, No Doubt has all but retired, so that kind of sucks. But I just look after, they do have some more albums I'm going to get to. It's been a while since I reviewed No Doubt, but I'm going to get to some more of these and see. I know that this is like their shining opus in terms of like the biggest hits that they've had, but I would have to say I'm going to have to see about some more of these.